it's Monday evening and I'm sure we want to get moving. So welcome to Sandringham EdTech's webinar on formative assessment. So just thinking about how we can use technology for formative assessment within our classroom and thinking about how we might use that as part of our recovery support. And the session in general, looking to explore some of the research and the pedagogy behind the use of formative assessment and EdTech, and then thinking about what we're doing with that information, how we're using it as a best approach within our school. Just to give a little bit of context around who we are. So we are based at Sandringham School. We're part of the EdTech Demonstrator Programme at Sandringham EdTech. We are a co-educational comprehensive academy in Hertfordshire with over 1,600 students and including 400 in sixth form. We run a bring your own device scheme or programme rather. We have since 2014, so we are quite far into our journey, and we're a luxurious place that each of our students have access to a device, and it's embedded within our practice. We use a blended learning approach where we are encouraging the use of technology and traditional methods in collaboration, hopefully encouraging and allowing our teachers to pick and choose where they use each element within their teaching and there to support their teaching and their current practice. We are also a research school. Some of the research that we'll look at today has been developed through our work as a research school as well. So let's start taking a look at some of that research. This is a graphic that comes from the EEF, the Educational Endowment Foundation, and really just in here to highlight kind of the effectiveness and how important technology can be in terms of its impact and its use within schools. Interestingly, this diagram on the column on the furthest right, your third column, has now subsequently been removed to highlight that actually the use of digital technology is embedded within how we use feedback and metacognition. And if we think about the impact, or the research suggests that the impact is very high in relation to the cost of using apps and using EdTech in school. And actually, after those initial outlays, the apps that we're accessing, the apps that we are using are relatively low cost and allow for huge progress if used in the right ways. And we'll take a look at and some advice around how you might want to use those within your settings. This quote is also there to support as well. And it's from the EEF similarly. And I think really works to highlight the importance that is how we are using that technology and thinking about actually effective uses of formative assessment should be embedded in our general teaching and learning practice. And it's not that technology being used in isolation. It's a part of a collaborative tool within your teaching and learning and within your everyday practice. And actually, it doesn't matter. And also, I think, well, this could be contested because obviously we've experienced the difference between asynchronous and synchronous learning. But actually, it's not about when that learning or how that learning, the environment that's taking place. It's the quality of what we're producing, the quality of that explanation, and how we're presenting to our students being the really important aspect of how we're using technology. The EEF have created a document a guidance report on the use of technology within schools. And the next few slides take some of that key information and present their research and their ideas around how technology can be used to support your practice within school and in relation to formative assessment. Highlighting in the first slide and first bullet point here around its opportunity for technology to improve assessment feedback. And the bit I wanted to highlight in here, and I'm just going to my pointer on here and looking here in terms of actually it's that feedback aspect, and a common thread throughout this session will highlight actually not just the importance of using formative assessment and using those technological tools, but actually what we do with that information being one of, if not the most important aspect of formative assessment, and thinking about how we want our students to react and reflect upon what they've just conducted as part of that formative assessment. And also around the idea that we will all use within our practice different tools, and it's not necessarily the tool that is most important, it's the way that that message is being delivered and the structure in which that's being delivered and the feedback opportunities that that presents. And if we also think around the technology as a way that we can reduce workload, I think actually if you're early on within that process, we're thinking that actually there's a big investment of our time to create those resources, but once created, you're building a catalogue that you can revisit very quickly of high quality resources that will save you time in the long run. But also the speed in which formative assessment can run through technology quicker than maybe traditional methods of writing a piece of paper, taking them in, marking, and then offering feedback perhaps in a later lesson or the next lesson. With digital technology tools giving the opportunity for instant feedback and that instant visiting of maybe misconception, and the opportunity to break that down very quickly or in fact instantaneously. But being aware and actually maybe working collaboratively within your settings, within your departments to share that workload, because when we move over to technology, we allow that extra element of collaboration between professionals as well as maybe from peer to peer. We also can take a look at, and we'll also discuss the idea around how we can use the apps and the different tools and edtech tools available to offer direct feedback and offer that opportunity for students to actually reflect upon their learning and instantly be questioned to develop that learning or address that misconception, with some apps giving the opportunity to revisit missed questions or to revisit points of weakness, and really help you kind of cement and take those lessons a little bit further through your use of technology. This essentially highlights a couple of points I've already picked out, but these are particularly highlighted within that framework. But the opportunity for technology to be used to reduce workload, and as we know, time is probably one of our most valuable commodities as teachers. So any opportunities would be very, very welcome. And I think this is really important because it's a common thread that we talk about with our work with other schools and as part of the demonstrator program, that the success isn't the technology or the use of technology itself, it's the pedagogy that it allows you to work with. And actually, it's not, that's why we say the tool isn't necessarily important, it's how you're accessing and how you're using it. And I think it also addresses the idea that I think there's a general fear sometimes that technology is being used to kind of replace the teacher. I think our understanding is that actually that will never happen. What it should be being used to do is support teaching and support you in your classroom, to develop your strategies, to develop your pedagogy, and in this instance, to develop your use of assessment and your understanding of where your students are at. A couple of things that we would suggest that we often talk about in relation to successful formative assessment, or when you're thinking about those processes, are four aspects here. So simplicity, making sure that the students aren't being asked to access lots of different formats and different routines in one session, and actually thinking about where you are as a setting, as a practitioner, as a facilitator. You're not necessarily expected to use all of these apps at once. And if you're at a starting point, thinking about what's going to work for your setting and building up that knowledge. As I said, we're very fortunate to have run a bring your own device policy for many years. So our students are adapting to the use of moving from class to class and using potentially different apps. But there's no expectation that it should be an all or nothing. Start small and build up that level of confidence. The opportunity to easily provide comments and feedback on specific parts of student work. So really taking upon that reflection part post-assessment to drive down into the details and really use formative assessment to try and understand where the areas of weaknesses are, what misconceptions need to be approached. Giving students the opportunity to respond to feedback. So thinking about how you're going to frame that within that assessment point. Is it going to be another task within that particular app or that particular program? Is it going to be teacher-led in that element of blended learning where as a class you then work through the results and work through those common areas of misconception? But also the opportunity through some of the edtech tools that we'll look at of modelling, students having the opportunity to see other students' work or your work to model good practice, and edtech tools give excellent opportunity in order to be able to do that. Think about how technology can help in a more detailed way, and actually if you have questions around actually is this going to be an effective use of my time, effective use of my class time, but if you think about the processes and the opportunity to speed up that assessment tool and speed up those routines within your classwork. We talk about time saving, but also lots of the apps and tools that we're going to look at today will offer an element of self-marking should you want to use it through multiple choice, which obviously saves your time and workload, and also offers that instant feedback to students and that instant gratification of success. It can enable or support asynchronous assessment. So thinking about actually when we look at these tools, are there tools that actually you want to reserve and use predominantly outside the classroom to support potentially homework tasks, etc. We've found, and obviously unfortunately we found, that a lot of these tools can be particularly useful in remote learning, and hopefully we don't return to that, but we are still across the country and in situations where that could happen. And think about actually how you can make the most of these tools to support remote learning should we need to. And thinking about how EdTech tool can be offered to support maybe scaffolding, adapting questioning, and offering different challenges to different students. And as we develop our knowledge of those tools a little bit more, so really looking into the deeper element of those tools of how we can really stretch them to actually offer more to the varying needs of our students. As we go through, and actually there's an infographic and a couple of slides towards the end that give you a wider example, but these I just dragged through a couple of the key assessment tools that we use at Sandringham that we've seen in other sites as well. I'll skip past. But you might be familiar with some of these. Your top two on the left hand here essentially are the Google and Microsoft version of Forms, which are fantastic for quick quizzing, but also to give opportunities to students for longer form responses. Kahoot quizzes, which are two of the most popular in terms of quick quizzing within your within that area. Plickers I'll go through in a little bit more detail, but some of these might be a little bit more recognisable, and we'll explore these as we continue through. The next infographic is from a DEMP. So DEMP is the Designing and Evaluating Innovative Mobile Pedagogies, part of the Erasmus project and a research program that's taken place to look at the effectiveness and how we can use mobile pedagogy and use technology as part of learning within schools and within educational settings. Some of the key things I wanted to pick out here are probably some of the things that are related to the discussion that you've perhaps had, or some of the reasons that you want to start trying to use EdTech within your classrooms or develop your use of. We look at collaboration and we look at that as a formative assessment tool. So things through like ClassKit, which we'll look at a little bit later. Jamboard becoming very popular in terms of peer review, we're able to see each other's work, or co-designing elements of formative assessment or classwork beyond there. The adaptive nature of technology to allow students to be stretched a little bit more. So some of those tools, such as Blookit and quizzes, offering elements of gamification, which students really enjoy, and think about how you can use that to really engage them within that learning. We think about the mobility, kind of the seamless learning. So being able to take your device from a classroom setting to a home setting for students to start using that device as not just a tool that they see for entertainment, but an educational tool. And actually where I think we are using EdTech successfully within the classroom, students will start to recognise that those tools are available to them outside of the classroom as well. Students the opportunity to reflect that student autonomy, and we talk about independent learning, and actually students and many of our young people have access to a device, whether it's being used in an educational setting or not, and giving students that opportunity and that device solely for that purpose or as an additional purpose. Authenticity being, I think, really interesting as well. We look towards careers and we look towards post-education and students moving into the workplace, and we'll be very aware that technology is having huge implications upon the work sector, and actually by building that use of technology within our learning and as an everyday tool for learning and our everyday practice as students, preparing them for the outside world as those job sectors start to evolve, and making sure that students are prepared for what might come through the use of technology in their later careers. Another piece of research I like to draw upon, and we've drawn upon, I've drawn upon quite frequently before, is around Simon Sinek's writing around, actually this is around leadership, but I thought this might be pertinent to anybody, whether you're leadership or you're just thinking about the use of EdTech within your classroom. And thinking about that why being really important, and actually asking yourself why you want to use EdTech for formative assessment, for as a technology tool, and what that purpose is. So if it's within your classroom, thinking about that, why am I using it? And on the bottom run over here, what do I want to achieve, and how am I going to use that within my particular classroom? And just kind of to reiterate that point, that the use of EdTech needs to have a purpose, and try not to fall into that trap of using it as a quick starter or quick end to a lesson to fill lesson time, and actually thinking when you're creating those tools and embedding those tools within your practice, why are you using that formative assessment? What are you checking? What are you checking your students' understanding and knowledge of? How are you going to use that data once you've collected it? And thinking about how those results will impact your future teaching and your development. And we think about lots of the apps that we use, they allow us that deeper level of understanding and checking of our student understanding. You obviously want to think about your particular platform, and every setting being different. Some of the things that we talked through today might not be appropriate for your setting, but actually you might be able to move them into a direction that is more appropriate for your students in your classroom. Obviously, you need to consider the accessibility, the devices that you have available, the level of response you require, whether you want long form answers, want to go something towards form, or you just want multiple choice, something that is quick, like a Kahoot, a Quizzes, or a Plickers, which is the third symbol along there. The time that you're going to devote within your class teaching time towards completing that assessment, and the suitability towards your particular students. And then you want to really consider actually how you can create those quality questions. Not teaching you to suck eggs, because obviously your classroom is your domain and you will be doing this whether you're using technology or not, but thinking about that, designing questions through those apps, making sure that multiple choice responses, and again something I've probably been guilty of frequently in the past, is making sure that we're not too easily signposting towards the correct answer with one very obvious answer and three very obvious incorrect answers. And we want to challenge our students. If we're not challenging them within finding the correct answer, is it serving a purpose? We might get that gratification that everybody's got it right, but if they haven't had to work for it, have we met the purpose? Is it going to be effective? Thinking about hinge questions, using formative assessment to really think about, are your students ready to move on to the next series of learning within that project, within that scheme of work? And it will really help you to get an understanding of whether students have understood what's come before, and it might then force you to change your practice moving forward, because it might highlight something you need to go back and revisit. And then thinking about how you can make that feedback task-based. Is it something that's teacher-led? Does it start teacher-led and ask students to go and develop something off the back of the misconceptions they might have found through that use of assessment, as opposed to just telling them what the right answer was? How are they going to work hard to make sure that they've addressed and met and broken down whatever that misconception might have been? And actually, I'll give you a moment just to read the quote from here, but actually it points back to what we've just said around the idea that we shouldn't have just obviously the wrong answers. The questions that we develop really need to challenge our students to make sure that they are building those processes and that framework for understanding and moving forward, and then addressing those ideas further down the line. And then you want to pick your approach. Obviously, again, as I've said previously many times, it needs to work for your setting. So what will work in one setting won't work elsewhere. So you want to think about whether you want to make it student-paced. Apps such as Quizzes will allow students to work through, Edpuzzle will allow students to work through at their own pace, which will have its benefits because they can pace it, they can take their time, and they're not forced into putting down a quick response to keep up with the class. But it can make it harder then to address those misconceptions in real time. It's not a problem because you can still do that once the quiz is finished. Then you've got the option of teacher pace, which is great because you can dive in question by question and really drive down into the detail of any misconceptions or any answers that students have really struggled with. But can lead to students waiting around or pressuring some students to just put in a response so they're not falling behind the rest of the class. But also think about how that's going to affect the climate of your classroom. What's behaviour like? Will it impact the behaviour of the classroom? Will it change the mood of the classroom? And thinking about how it's most going to benefit your individual setting. Okay, so taking a look at a few apps in a little bit more detail. The next few slides are just going to uncover some of the tools which you might already be using, but worth reflecting upon within this example of Quizzes. So when you're working through quizzes. And actually, if you haven't used quizzes before, it's free to sign up. If you've already got a single sign login through Microsoft Teams or Google Suite, students will be able to log in very quickly, as will you, through those addresses. But once you've created that particular quiz, you can delve down into those reports. So on the left-hand side of your screen, once you're logged in, you'll be able to click reports and see your previous quizzes that your students have taken part in. So just an example of one here. You'll get a quick overview on the first page, but then that allows you, by clicking on the quiz in particular, to delve down with a little bit more detail. And I think this is where you'll gain the most reward or the most impact, and reflecting upon that key information, because quite quickly, as the teacher within that room, I can take a look and see which questions my students struggled on the most, and that's where we can start drawing out and picking out, okay, why did we get this wrong? What were the common misconceptions? Do we know the right answers? Can I pick on a student who got it right to explain to the other students who got it wrong? And actually, even if we're looking post after lesson, the students have gone, it can inform your practice in terms of, I now have identified an area of learning that I need to revisit, that students are commonly struggling upon. And I can also factor that back into follow-up quizzes and start that retrieval practice of going back and revisiting key information time and time again until it is fully embedded. Also worth noting that most of the tools that we use for quizzing online will allow a quick export to Google Sheets or Excel. Obviously incredibly helpful in terms of our tracking. So if we're asked to identify where students have made progress, or again, further delve down into across classes, are there common misconceptions across the whole topic where we need to revisit and actually look at how we're teaching that selection of the topic. But hopefully, again, we don't fall into this, but if we think about how examinations have been shaped in secondary schools over the past couple of years, where we have had to evidence our understanding and our judgments upon gradings, having this kind of information might help you in the future. Hopefully we don't need it. If we do, hopefully help you identify some of those key areas and support your judgments further down the line. And it's very quick, a click of a button, and that's stored for you to revisit when and where you need it. Going to introduce one more model, one more framework, and then we'll delve into another little tutorial. But this is the TPAC knowledge. As you can see in here, you've got the little abbreviations that give you a little idea around that name. So this was developed at the Michigan State University, an American university, and has gone through different variations. This is the latest, adding in this circle around the outside around the contexts being really important, and again, something we've mentioned a couple of times, thinking about your context and how that's going to fit. But thinking about how each of these stages, and obviously what we want to delve towards or drive towards, is this sweet spot in the middle, and actually it builds in those three sections. So we think about our technological knowledge. How well do we know the technology? How well can we use and model that technology and embed it into our classroom, which is then supporting this crossover into our pedagogical knowledge. So our use and understanding of technological knowledge starts to impact our understanding and our pedagogy as professionals, as teachers. And thinking about over here on the right-hand side, the content is actually thinking about, this is what we want our students to know, or what our students need to know. And so if we can use these two on this side to really help our students understand and develop their content knowledge and start using those EdTech tools to develop this knowledge, we start working towards this sweet spot in the middle. And actually, in this instance, we're focusing it upon in terms of our use of maybe EdTech tools and apps, but obviously this drives down and obviously can be applied to various elements of learning as well. But this is something that we consider and that we look at when we're thinking about our use of tech tools, and when we're working with other schools as well, in terms of how they might want to approach their use of technology and their use of EdTech within their settings. It might be something from a leadership point of view that you might want to consider as a framework if you're looking to embed or start this, launch this across your school. And just a quick, almost a little bit of a plug across to previous work we've done, but we have previous webinars around retrieval practice, and I thought this infographic is quite interesting, and I created by Christian, who's run a session around retrieval as well. But thinking about how these two areas merge, so thinking about our continual and our constant use of formative assessment, and those routines start to blend with retrieval. So low stakes quizzing becomes a common use within a classroom, and then students gain that as expected, and they're automatically moving towards those elements of retrieval and embedding that learning a little bit more. I thought that's quite a nice little link to just identify that these things, it's not just existing within its own realm, it's part of our overall practice. Okay, so I'm going to dive into, and hopefully this is helpful for some of you, depending on how far through your journey you are. You might have used forms, you might be a proficient user. This video is a 10-minute video that should just take you through some of the basics of Google Forms, and also how you might look at the responses off the back. So I was going to play the video, and then we'll come back and look at a couple of other apps in the time that we have left.
Classwork tab once you've reached your class page. In the drop-down box in Create, select Quiz Assignment. That will automatically populate a blank Google form for you to create your quiz, which you can click on here and move through and create. Once this has been created, because everything is live and collected through the cloud, it will automatically update what you have here. The other way you can create a Google form, if you would rather create the form and then attach it to your Google Classroom later, is directly through Google Drive or through the Google Forms web app. In your waffle here, if you scroll down, you will see somewhere towards the bottom, or right at the bottom, your Google Form quick link. This will take you to Google Forms. From here, you will have a selection of templates that you can start from. You might want to be creating an exit ticket, which can often pop up here as well. More often than not, you'll want to have some freedom around what you create. So you will just create a blank form in very much the same style as was done previously here. Once you've opened or started to create your blank quiz, you have a few different options and tools to choose from to complete and structure your form. Obviously, your title will go right at the top here, and any description can go in the box here, just to maybe support students as they work their way to make sure they found the right document. You then have a selection of tools to create questions. Most commonly used or quite popular are multiple choice questions. You can fill out options however you desire, obviously with slightly more robust questioning and answers than I have here. But what's important, if you want to use or make use of self-marking or make sure that it is set up as a quiz, you need to make sure in your answer key you have selected which option is correct. If you do this, make sure it's required, so students have to answer that particular question. Once you've done this, it will ensure that any parts that can be self-marked will be self-marked and hopefully lead towards some time saving in the future. Depending on how you set up your form, this is set as a particular quiz. However, if you set a form up through the second method we showed a moment ago, you might need to make sure that you look at your settings and make sure this is selected so that it is a quiz rather than just a survey or form to collect information. Back to your questions, let's have a look at some other question types that you can work with. So to add a new question, you've got your little plus button here. I already had one available, so I'll work with the one that's here. Outside of multiple choice, you might have checkboxes, which works in obviously the same format, but allows students to tick more than one response if there may be perhaps more than one correct answer. You have drop-down boxes, so you can drop down and select from a series of responses. Or you might have a short answer or a paragraph, depending on what you're trying to ascertain, and if the question response needs to be longer than just a few words or sentences. The difference with a paragraph or short response is that you don't have that option for self-marking, or rather you do, but responses have to be very precise, so they won't take account for spelling and other grammatical errors that are within there. It's not a problem, because you can, as we'll see in a minute, work through and correct and offer feedback on those long and short answer responses as well. Alongside those traditional methods, you've also got multiple choice grids, which work quite well if you're collecting or looking to collect a series of data or information, a linear scale and a tick box grid. It's probably also worth noting a couple of additional features that you might want to use within your Google Forms, depending on your subject or how engaging or what your purpose is for a particular quiz. You may have noticed down the side here, you can add additional descriptions, but it might be you want to insert an image for students to discuss or have to support whatever they might be answering questions around. So you just click your image here. You have the option, as usual, to upload from your computer, take something you've already got on your Google Drive, or create a Google image search from there. You also have the option to add videos. As a media studies teacher with a media background, this is really beneficial for my students because I can share clips with them to ask them maybe to deconstruct, or perhaps even just use it to offer a little bit of additional support before they answer a set of questions. So you can search for a video through there. Sometimes the search function isn't quite as populated as if you were to search through a different or YouTube through your browser. So you can also insert a YouTube URL here. Once you've finished creating the quiz and you are happy with the questions that are there, you want to consider how you're going to share this with your class. If you've initially gone for option 1 and you've created through a class assignment, the easiest way is once you save that, it will share it with the students within that class. And obviously you might want to choose particular things like hand-in date and topics, but we'll leave that blank for now. If you shared through class, students will see it somewhat like this, and they'll be able to just click the link here. It will take them to the form and they will fill it out. They will make their way through. If you've created in that second format just through Google Drive or through the Google Forms webpage in your browser, you might want to share via URL. So you click your share button and you've got the option there to email it directly to somebody through their web address, or take a URL and perhaps embed it into a presentation or into an email or in any other format. Essentially, you've just got a copy and paste link. If you're doing it in that way, you might have to look at your settings and just make sure you've got some of the following things checked. Obviously, making sure that it is set up as a quiz. If you go through the Google Classroom, it will automatically set it as a quiz. But if you created it yourself, it might not recognize it as a quiz, and therefore you might need to click that one here. You can choose whether you want students to receive marks immediately. And if you've got some questions in there that are maybe paragraphs or short sentences, you might want to leave that until later, till you've had a chance to go through and mark. Otherwise, students might get a response or a score that isn't in line with actually where they've achieved. You can ask, obviously, to get point values. You can automatically assign point values per question or within the questions themselves. And you can limit students to how many times they can respond. And this is quite important, making sure that email addresses are automatically collected so you can see who's answered. You also might want to have a section as part of the form for students to be able to fill in their name. It's up to you. If you've got this selected, you cut the necessity out in terms of filling in names and forms, etc. Those are the key things in terms of setting and sharing. Okay, once you've shared that form and your students have had an opportunity to complete it, you want to take a look at the responses to inform your following practice in terms of what do you assess next, what were the common areas of misconceptions, but also offering feedback perhaps on some of those long answer questions, and for you to be able to take stock of how your students are making progress. I'm going to use a form that I've used previously, and I'm going to use it across a series of tabs just to try and protect the identity of my students. But as you click on the form there, or if you've set through Google Classroom, you can click on that form again and you'll see this page come up as the creator of that document. What you are going to want to look at are the responses, which you can see here. I've got it open on this page here. You'll get a breakdown. You'll get some insights into how the questions were answered, where there were areas of strengths and weaknesses. Frequently missed questions will appear there, as well as scores. I'm going to zip past there so you can't see the names. And you can go and drive down into each question in a little bit more detail. So you can start to pick out where the areas of common misconceptions might have been. You can also look on a question by question basis, so you can get all of the responses from each student and it will tell you who's answered where. And you can add more collective feedback, so you can give feedback to all the people that got the correct answer, or maybe more importantly, offer some guidance to the students who didn't get the right answer. This also might be a process that you want to do with the class and take them through step by step. The next section that you might want to look at, and if you've had some maybe responses that have required students to add paragraphs or short sentences, this is where you might want to collect and tick and say where it might be right or wrong, but also to offer some more feedback. So, for example, give them a point towards the correct answer. But you can also add a video response, or you can link a file in there, or maybe to a web address where they can find more information and maybe correct that mistake themselves. What's really important, depending on how you offer feedback, obviously being really important, maybe setting tasks from there is for students to react and then make their way towards the correct answers, or getting rid of that misconception, is then using this information to inform your next steps as a teacher and within your practice. Once you have the opportunity to mark and offer feedback within that document and perhaps live to your class, you want to think about what you're going to do with that data. If you've set through Google Classroom, it will automatically update your gradebook for your students within that classroom. Perhaps if you shared a link, you might want to create a spreadsheet by clicking here. This will generate a Google Sheet. I won't click one now because it will generate a sheet and show you all the student names, which I don't want to do. And then you can take that data and maybe add it to an existing spreadsheet. You've also got the option when you click there to add to an existing spreadsheet. But it allows you to obviously store that and track that, which will be always available through your Google Drive folder.
Okay, thanks for watching that. Hopefully that was helpful for some of you. There was another video I was going to show on Quizlet and Socrative, but we started slightly late. So what I will do is make these available, and I will show you in a moment where you can look and find more tutorials around some of these key apps. I'm going to just run through a few key apps quickly so that we can finish as close to time as possible. But obviously Quizlet and Socrative, these tools are both really good. They offer different formats, and Quizlet started as a way of creating flashcards, but actually built in the quizzing tools as well. But with both of these apps, there is a huge database of pre-existing material, and then you might want to, you have the opportunity to take it and edit it, make a copy and edit it so you can pitch it towards your students a little bit more so. But there might be huge elements of time saving within there, especially maybe think about setting homework tasks and continuing the learning for your students. I also wanted to quickly and briefly mention ClassKick as a tool that's becoming more commonly used within our setting. Maths and science use this very successfully in our school, but actually across lots of different departments. ClassKick allows you to upload and create a set of slides like you would have for class slides. It will give you a class code that you can share with your students, and it will create a set of slides for each of those students. What's nice about ClassKick is this screenshot of a teacher view is that you can watch students as they work through in real time. You can click on individual slides and offer direct feedback as they're working. You can pick out a particular student and model that screen on your board if one student is making particularly good progress and you want to show the other students how to address maybe some of their misconceptions or areas that they're struggling with. But I think what's really good is you've got that overview as a teacher. You can directly see that impact. You can talk in real time. You can assess in real time, and the feedback becomes instant. Students can also put their hands up to privately ask questions, so you can essentially see a whole class and maybe perhaps get into some of those students who might not feel confident to verbally ask a question. They can do it digitally. You can respond to them either digitally again, or actually open it up to the class and break down perhaps some of those barriers that are there for some of those students. But ClassKick is really good and worth taking a look if you haven't seen or used previously. I've used this previously as a media studies teacher. Edpuzzle is great. You can upload a video or choose from a wide selection of YouTube videos, and then throughout that video set multiple choice or open-ended questions for students to react to what's taking place within that video. Again, as you can see, if you've used YouTube videos within your lessons previously, you can probably see actually how this will be a good tool to then get that direct questioning. The tools within Edpuzzle will let you reflect, offer feedback, again, like the other apps we've looked at, drive down into common areas of misconception. And also take a look and as we like to do as teachers, monitor how much time students have spent on a particular answer or watching a particular element of the clip to really make sure they've got those processes in place. But Edpuzzle is another great tool. I mentioned Plickers, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, slightly bit more detail with time in mind. But Plickers is great if you're in a setting that hasn't got much technology at this stage. It doesn't require students to have a device. Essentially, it takes one device, which could be a phone, depending on your policies, that might not be appropriate. But if you've got access to a tablet, downloading through the Plickers app, you are given 40 cards that you can download that look like this. You create multiple choice questions through the app or the browser. You display the questions on your whiteboard. Students will be designated a card each, and you can designate a name to a card, then numbered from 1 to 40. So you can designate names, but you can designate numbers. Each card obviously has 4 sides, and they will point it as an A, B, C, or D, depending on what they want the answer to be. You'll ask the question through the app, and they might have that on your whiteboard. Students will respond by facing it the way they think, an A, B, or C. They will hold up their card, and you will use the camera on your tablet to quickly scan the room. It's very successful, that it's very easy to scan. I've used in very large rooms before, and it's managed to pick out. Sometimes you might need to scan the room a couple of times, but then it will log all of the answers and instantly show the numbers of who got it right, who got it wrong. Again, allowing you to dive into a little bit more detail and very quickly use that formative assessment with the students being tech free and you the person with the tech. And this can work in settings where they have devices. Well, if you want it to be very sharp, very quick, you don't want to wait for them to take it out and log on, this still might be a really successful, really easy tool for you to use and embed within your practice. Now, I mentioned that there would be opportunity for you to go and look at some of these apps in more detail beyond this session. At Sandham EdTech, we've been creating this graphic, but supported by a website. Now, this is for Chromebooks. However, whatever system you're running, if it's web-based, you'll be able to access these apps as well. We've just created this because we've got lots of schools who are rolling out Chromebooks across their settings. There's a link in here, and I will attach a link in the follow-up email where there is a recording of this webinar and a link to this website. And the website will show has tutorials for all of these apps, has links to further information and further ways that they can be used within your classroom. So it's free for you to go and explore in a little bit more detail and in your own time. If you've noticed any of the apps that I've briefly discussed today that you want to kind of research in a little bit more detail. And we're going to continue adding to this website with more tutorials and blogs around those specific apps and delving a little bit deeper into those tools as we uncover them and as we get more information about them as they develop and adding new ones in there. So I'm going to bring this to a close in a moment, give you your evenings back. A couple of things kind of just to kind of consolidate here from a little bit of wider research. So this was research based around technology and pedagogy in relation to science, but I think it responds or applies to all areas of our curriculums and our classrooms. Again, just reaffirming those points around the things that we're trying to achieve, getting students to understand definitions, terminology, facts, principles, and thinking about the tools that we've briefly looked at today and the areas that we've discussed. All of these tools will support in all of these areas. Students are able to communicate what they know, and formative assessment can do that through the different tools, through your forms, through your quiz input, through your modelling on your jam boards, on your class kicks, on your ed puzzles as well. Students should know how to apply what they've learned, and that's that formative assessment importance. And this study kind of delved down into these areas and identified these areas as critically important in terms of using formative assessment. Students should develop the ability to evaluate critically various problem-solving approaches, and that's where actually you might start to experiment in different applications and different levels of detail through maybe not just core quizzing and multiple choice. Experience and experiment with those apps to ask them to delve a little bit deeper, really thinking about how you're reacting to the information that you found and setting up your future teaching. And then just a couple more bits from us. I'll whiz through these. At Sandham, we've developed the Great Teaching and Learning Framework through research schools and something we're running across our school. The reason I wanted to highlight this is on our EdTech blog page. All our recent blogs are focused around parts of this framework. So if you look at this framework and it's the key areas around curriculum, opportunities, long-term learning, modelling, we're taking these specific points within this framework and hopefully creating blogs that highlight the tools that can be used in relation to EdTech to support this teaching and learning framework, which drives upon our blended learning model and approach. There's a link here that's if you want to just search for sandhamedtech.co.uk-1 will take you to our EdTech website. There's a blog post page with all our recent blogs. We'll upload the videos that you've seen today and the webinar from today, but it's a variety of resources that we're continuing to add to as we explore and we find new tools, and as schools ask us to create more tools, then we'll make them available here as well if you found any of those helpful, but you want to look in a little bit more detail through YouTube, search Sandringham EdTech, and you'll get all the videos we've made so far, and we'll continue adding to that site as well. If you as a school would like a little bit more support with your use of EdTech, feel free to take a look at the EdTech demonstrator program. You can request support and to work as part of the program that is completely free, and you'll be assigned a school to support you, and it's the idea is that they create a bespoke program to support your school's use of EdTech, and that might be a very specific focus or a whole school focus. Then that support you can request to work with us at Sandringham or any of the schools involved with the project. Last year, I promise, we're also a teaching hub. So if you want to know about any of our further offers around teaching hub across all elements of your career, please feel free to visit the Auburn TSH website. We're also a computing hub, so if you'd like more specialist help with computing as a subject in general, again, another free service which you're more than welcome to take a look at and sign up to us or the relevant computing hub to your area. We're also a research school, as mentioned. If you search pedagogy or Sandringham Research School on Google, you'll pick up loads of articles, loads of information across all areas of teaching and learning, not just technology, but also you'll see some of our technology blogs in there as well. There haven't been any questions come through, so I'll leave it there for now, but feel free to get in touch with us if you have any particular questions. Ask us on Twitter, follow up to any emails that we send out as part as well if you want to work with us, if you've got any particular questions, and we're always happy to help and support where possible. I'm just going to check if no question comes through. That's okay. And outside that, sorry for the slightly late start. I've kept 45 minutes, but started slightly late. But hopefully that's been helpful, and we'll be in touch, and we'll make sure this is available to you after the session as well if you want to revisit anything or look in slightly more detail. But thanks very much for watching, and hopefully have a great evening. Take care and goodbye.